And thank you for joining me today. Today, my presentation focuses on the memoir of A Rumor by Philip Captu, which details his experience as a young Marine during the Vietnam War. I'll be discussing 3 chapters today. It's going to be Chapter 1, Chapter 5, and Chapter 14. These chapters represent key moments in Captu's emotional and moral journey, highlighting the themes of idealism, disillusionment, and the brutal realities of war. Thank you. Really quick, I want to go over 2 different definitions. First up, we have idealism. Idealism is a philosophical concept that emphasizes the importance of the mind and ideas in shaping reality. It suggests that the material world is either influenced by or dependent on the mind, consciousness, or spiritual principles. In idealism, the ultimate nature of reality is seen as a fundamentally or spiritual as opposed to material. This perspective can manifest in various fields, including philosophy, art, and politics, where it often promotes the belief that ideals and values should guide actions and decisions. Next up, we have the definition of disillusionment. Refers to a disappointment that arises when someone realizes when someone or something is not as good or valuable as they once thought. It often occurs that when expectations are not met, leading to a loss of belief or hope in people, ideas, or systems. Get into the first thing, I kind of just want to give you an idea of what A Rumor of War is. It is a memoir that captures the complexities of the Vietnam War and its effects on soldiers. Caputo is a young man who is also a Marine who arrives to Vietnam, and he is filled with idealism. He is very naive, which is common because most soldiers that go into Vietnam are naive and have this idealism. But the book not only recounts his experience in combat, it also examines how war reshapes the soldiers morally and emotionally. So, in today's presentation, I'll focus on the 3 chapters that represent the shifting nature of Caputo's perspective on the war. I decided to start with chapter 1, and I chose chapter 1 because I felt like it would have given us a little bit more of an understanding of how he felt during the beginning of this. And it does. So, Caputo introduces his youthful enthusiasm for war, which many readers might find a little bit surprising because of the horrors that follow into the book. So at the start, Caputo, he is full of a patriotic fervor driven by a sense of adventures and the excitement of going to war. Caputo's initial outlook is shaped by a romanticized image of war seen through books and popular culture. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a summary of what happened in chapter 1. Caputo and his fellow Marines are sent to Vietnam, and they are initially eager to fulfill their duties. They are eager and excited about the idea of combat, and they even mocked the old men back at home because they did not understand the glory of war. So, in this chapter, it highlights the theme of idealism versus reality. Caputo's excitement reflects the naive belief that war was something heroic and a clean cut, a belief that many soldiers likely shared the idealism, and is challenged by the moment they are experience the chaos and the violence of an actual war. So Caputo writes, we were all the same. Our innocence is unblemished by anything as mundanes, as knowledge or experience. So this quote is particularly powerful because it reveals the initial innocence of Caputo's and his comrades. They believe that they are embarking on a noble mission, not yet understanding that this war will strip them of their innocence. So the next thing that I'm going to be getting into is chapter 5. Chapter 5 is kind of like their first taste of reality and what the war really is. So in chapter 5, Caputo and his unit face their first taste of combat, which begins to erode their initial enthusiasm. So the chaos of the war hits, and it hits them pretty hard. The soldiers quickly realize that combat is not the heroic struggle they imagined, but an unpredictable, terrifying, and often an absurd ordeal. So, in summary of Chapter 5, Caputo's platoon is sent to a remote area where they face firefights. The intensity of the situation contrasts sharply with their initial perceptions of war. Many soldiers, including Caputo, are shocked by the brutality of the violence. Caputo's internal conflict starts to surface as he grapples with the meaning of mission, along with his role in the conflict. So, in this chapter, it is critical because it marks a shift from idealism versus reality to now disillusionment. So, Caputo's disillusionment is not just with the war itself, but with the military system operates, where there was confusion, poor leadership, and a lack of clear objectives, which leaves soldiers questioning their purposes. So Caputo also quotes and reflects that we are no longer the idealistic, happy-go-lucky we had been in the United States. We had become something else. So this quote is very important also because it marks the transition from the innocence of the youth to the loss of that innocence, and the signal of the emotional and psychological transformation that the war induces into the soldiers. Okay, so getting into the last chapter that I chose, which is chapter 14. So in chapter 14, Caputo's disillusionment has deepened. The chapter explores that the psychological toll of the war, including guilt, moral ambiguity, and the lasting trauma that soldiers experience. So, Caputo in the beginning, as we all know, he was very naive. He was excited for this war. He was ready to take it on, like he had no problem with it. But he is no longer the idealistic Marine he was when he first arrived in Vietnam. So in this chapter, Caputo experiences a particularly traumatic moment in the field. After a series of violent engagement, the Marines are involved in an operation where they killed a group of civilians, mistakenly identifying them as enemy combatants. Caputo is forced to confront the moral consequences of violence and begins to accept and feel the weight of his actions. So, chapter 14 represents the loss of innocence that occurs in the soldiers as they realize that war isn't about heroism but about survival and chaos. The theme of guilt is central here because Caputo's moral compass is shaken. He doesn't know who he is and what his morals are. And he begins to question not only the legitimacy of the war, but the own role that he is playing in it. He is no longer enthusiastic, the young man who believed in righteousness of his mission. He is now a man who is forced to confront the trauma and responsibility of his actions. So in this chapter, Caputo writes that war has made us into something we did not recognize. We were not the people we had been when we left for Vietnam. So this is a powerful line because it captures the profounded emotional and psychological transformation that Caputo and his fellow soldiers undergo as they confront the dehumanizing nature of war. So now that we have discussed chapter 1, chapter 5, and chapter 14, and we have now seen what they have gone through each chapter and how their thinking has changed, how their mindset has changed, and how they have changed overall as soldiers. So now I will be going over the synthesis of themes. So through these 3 chapters, we see a shift from idealism in chapter 1, then we see disillusionment in chapter 5, and eventually we're going into chapter 14 and we see guilt and the loss of innocence. Caputo's journey mirrors that of many soldiers in the Vietnam War, who were initially swept up with the idea of excitement and patriotism of going to war, only to be confronted with brutal and morally complex realities of combat. So by chapter 14, Caputo has transformed from a hopeful, eager Marine who is someone grappling with the deep psychological scars that left by the war. The key themes of idealism, disillusionment, and moral confusion thread through the chapters. We see how war has destroyed not only physical lives, but the very essence of a person's identity. So now I'm going to be getting into my own reflection of the book and what I thought. So, Caputo's memoir reflected to me as a broader historical and cultural shifts during the Vietnam War. So these soldiers were part of a generation that viewed war as it had to be glory and heroism, but they often found themselves trapped in a conflict that was morally ambiguous and politically decisive. So Caputo, Caputo's personal journey was, um, it reflected a broader disillusionment experienced by many who fought in the Vietnam War and the eventual loss or faith in both the mission and leadership that they were sent there to do. Right, so now I'm going to be getting into my analysis. Um, I believe that the post war trauma shows the trauma Caputo experiences and reflects the larger issue of PTSD among Vietnam veterans. Many soldiers, including Caputo, struggle to adjust to a civilian life after facing the horrors of the war. Getting into my conclusion, A Rumor of War takes an intimate look at the challenges faced by American soldiers during the Vietnam War, which still remains deeply controversial to this day. The impact of Caputo's story extends beyond the Vietnam War. It speaks to the universal and timeless nature of human suffering in the war. His memoir is poignant reminder of the realities of combat and the psychological damage it leaves behind and moral question it raises. Caputo's memoir serves as a powerful reminder of human cost of war. The themes of idealism, disillusionment, and brutal realities of the war, along with post-war trauma, these are still relevant today because it provides important lessons about the consequence of the armed conflict. Thank you for listening.